The planet had no name worth remembering, just a code in some old database that read Vera 7. And that was enough for the galaxy to forget it existed for hundreds of years. Kira Vasquez sat in the pilot seat of her small ship, the Restless Dreamer, watching the brown and gray world grow larger through her viewport as she descended through thin clouds of dust and ancient silence. She was 34 years old. Born on Earth in a small town she rarely thought about anymore. And she had spent the last 12 years flying from star to star, looking for things other people had missed or given up on, or simply never cared to find. The Galactic Concord had mapped this sector centuries ago, long before humans ever left their home planet. And their surveys said Vera 7 was barren and useless and not worth a second look. But Kira had learned something important in her years of searching. The galaxy was very old and very big, and even the most careful explorers sometimes missed things that were right in front of them. She had found the coordinates in a corrupted star map, a piece of data so old that her computer could barely read it. And she had won that data chip in a card game on a station where nobody asked questions about where things came from. The map showed a marker on Vera 7. Nothing more than a tiny symbol that could have meant anything or nothing at all. But Kira had followed worse leads to better discoveries. And she was not the kind of person who left mysteries. Alone, her ship touched down in a valley between two low mountains that had been worn smooth by millions of years of wind and time. And when she stepped outside, she felt the thin air press against her face through her breathing mask. The ground was hard and dry and covered in a fine layer of dust that rose with every step she took. And the sky above was the color of rust and old metal. And there was no sound anywhere except the whisper of wind through the rocks. Kira pulled out her scanner and began walking toward the anomaly it had detected from orbit. A geometric signature that did not match anything natural. And as she walked, she thought about all the survey teams that had come here before her. The Valesi had sent a probe here 800 years ago and found nothing of interest. And the Thyran hegemony had done a mineral scan 2 centuries later and declared the planet worthless. And a dozen other species had looked at this world and decided it had nothing to offer. None of them had been curious enough to land and walk and look with their own eyes. And Kira smiled behind her mask as she climbed over a ridge and saw what waited on the other side. The doors stood at the base of a cliff face, rising 40 meters high and 20 meters wide, made of some black material that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. They were covered in strange symbols that flowed and curved in patterns her translator could not understand. And they were so perfectly smooth that they looked like they had been placed there yesterday, rather than buried under millions of years of dust and neglect. Kira stood very still and stared at them for a long time, feeling something she had not felt since. She was a child looking up at the stars for the first time. Wonder. She walked closer and her scanner beeped with data it could not explain. Readings that made no sense. Energy signatures that should not exist in a structure this old. And she realized that whatever this was, it had been waiting here since before any of the current galactic civilizations had learned to walk upright. Her database told her that other species had found these doors before, that the Valesi probe had actually scanned them and sent back images, and that the official report had marked them as quote sealed and inaccessible with no viable entry method detected end quote. The galaxy had looked at these doors and shrugged and moved on. Just like they did with everything else, they did not immediately understand. And Kira felt a flash of something that might have been anger or might have been pity for all those explorers who had come so close and then given up. She reached out her gloved hand and touched the surface. And it was cold even through the thick material of her suit. Cold in a way that seemed to go deeper than temperature. And she pulled her hand back and took a breath. The symbols on the doors were like nothing in any language database she had access to. Not even close to any known script from any known civilization, living or dead. And that meant these doors were older than recorded history itself. Kira sat down on a flat rock and looked at them and thought about what she should do next. And she decided that she would not do what everyone else had done. She would not scan them and shrug and leave. She would stay and figure out what they were. She sent a message back to her ship, telling it to settle in for a long stay. And then she pulled out her portable shelter and began setting up camp right there in front of the doors that the galaxy had forgotten. The wind blew dust across the valley, and the rust-colored sky began to darken as the distant sun set behind the mountains. And Kira Vasquez sat alone on a dead world, looking at a mystery that was 3 million years old, and smiled. She had nowhere else to be and nothing better to do, and a lifetime of patience stored up for exactly this kind of moment. And she whispered to herself that she was going to figure this out, no matter how long it took. The doors stood silent and dark and ancient before her, keeping their secrets the way they had kept them since before humanity existed. But Kira was human, and humans were very good at not giving up. She did not know it yet, but she was about to change everything. 3 weeks passed on Vareth 7, and Kira did not leave. She stayed in her small shelter and studied the doors every single day from sunrise to sunset, and sometimes long into the cold, dark nights. She scanned them with every tool she had. She photographed every symbol. She measured every angle and curve and line, and she sent all of her data back to the few contacts she trusted, asking if anyone had ever seen anything like this before. The answers came back slowly through the long distances of space, and they all said the same thing. Nobody knew what these symbols meant. Nobody recognized the material the doors were made from, and nobody could explain how a structure could survive in perfect condition for over 3 million years. One of her contacts was an old professor from a human university who specialized in dead civilizations. And he told her that the symbols looked a tiny bit like records from something called the Orvith Dominion, a civilization so ancient that they had risen and fallen before any current species had evolved into intelligent beings. The Orvith were legends, ghosts from the deep past that most scholars did not even believe had existed. And their homeworld had been destroyed by a supernova so long ago that the light from that explosion had reached Earth before humans had invented writing. If these doors belonged to the Orvith, then they were the most important discovery in galactic history. But Kira could not prove anything because she could not get inside, and she could not make the doors respond to anything she did. She tried everything she could think of, and she tried everything other people had tried before her, but nothing worked. She used cutting tools that could slice through starship armor, and they did not leave a single mark on the black surface. She used explosives that could crack open mountains, and the doors did not even vibrate. She used electronic probes and sonic resonators and magnetic fields, and nothing happened at all. The Velesi had tried psionics 800 years ago, reaching out with their powerful minds to force the doors open. And they had failed completely. And Kira was not a psychic anyway, so she could not even attempt that approach. She sat in front of the doors on day 22 and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Defeat the doors were just too old, and too advanced, and too far beyond anything she understood. And maybe the galaxy had been right to give up on them. Maybe some mysteries were meant to stay mysteries forever. Kira looked at the symbols and wondered who had carved them and what they had been thinking, and whether they had ever imagined that someone would sit here millions of years later trying to understand their work. She was tired and frustrated and alone on a dead planet, talking to a wall that would not answer. And she laughed at herself for being so stubborn and foolish. And then she did something that no one else had ever done. Something so simple and so human that it had never occurred to any of the ancient and wise species who had come before her. She took off her glove and pressed her bare hand against the cold black surface, and she spoke out loud. "My name is Kira Vasquez," she said, and her voice sounded small and strange in the thin air of the dead world. I came from a planet called Earth very far away from here, and I have been traveling alone for a long time looking for things that other people have forgotten. The doors did not respond, but she kept talking anyway, because she had nothing left to lose. I do not want to take anything from you, she said. I do not want to steal your secrets or use your technology for war or profit. I am just curious. I just want to know who built you and why and what happened to them. She pressed her palm flat against the surface and felt deep cold seeping into her skin, and she told the doors about her life and her travels and the things she had seen and the loneliness that came with spending so much time in empty space. She told them about Earth and about humanity and about how her species had only been traveling between stars for 200 years and how everyone in the galaxy thought humans were young and reckless and not very important. She told them that she had come a very long way to see them and that she was not going to leave until she understood something. Anything at all, even if it took the rest of her life. And then she felt something change. The cold under her palm began to warm, and the symbols on the doors began to glow with a soft blue light that spread outward from where she touched. And Kira pulled her hand back and stepped away with her heart beating fast in her chest. Light grew brighter and the symbols began to move, flowing across the surface like water, rearranging themselves into patterns that almost looked like words she could understand. And a deep sound came from somewhere inside the structure, a sound like a voice that had not spoken in 3 million years. Waking up from a very long sleep, the door shuddered and dust fell from the cliff face above them, and Kira stood frozen, watching as a thin line of light appeared down the center of the massive black surface for the first time since before any living civilization existed. The doors began to open. Kira stood alone in the dust and the wind, watching the impossible happen, and she understood something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten a long time ago. Sometimes the answer is not force or technology or ancient wisdom. Sometimes the answer is just being willing to reach out and introduce yourself. As the door swung open slowly and silently, and blue light poured out from the space beyond, and Kira Vasquez walked forward into a place that no living being had entered in over 3 million years. She did not know what she would find inside, but she knew that everything was about to change. Doors had been waiting all this time, not for the strongest or the smartest or the oldest. They had been waiting for someone who still remembered how to be curious, and that someone had finally arrived. The inside of the fortress was vast beyond anything Kira had imagined, with halls that stretched so far she could not see their ends, and ceilings that rose so high they disappeared into soft blue light. She walked slowly through the entrance chamber with her boots making quiet sounds on a floor that looked like polished glass but felt warm beneath her feet. And she looked at the walls covered in more of those flowing symbols that now seemed to pulse with life. The air was clean and fresh, despite the doors having been sealed for millions of years. And the temperature was comfortable, and everything felt alive in a way that should have been impossible for a structure this ancient. Kira passed through archways into rooms filled with things she could not identify. Machines that hummed quietly, screens that flickered with data in languages she could not read, shelves that held objects made of materials she had never seen before. This was not a tomb or a ruin or a dead place waiting to be picked over by scavengers. This was a sanctuary that had been preserved perfectly across an unimaginable span of time. Waiting for someone to return, she walked for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper into the fortress, until she came to a circular chamber at the heart of the structure where the blue light was brightest and the symbols on the walls moved fastest. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal made of the same black material as the doors, and above it floated a sphere of light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Kira approached slowly, and the sphere grew brighter and began to change shape, stretching and shifting until it formed something that looked almost like a figure, tall and slender with features that were not quite human but not quite anything else either. "You are the first," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Soft and ancient and filled with something that sounded almost like wonder. "In all the long ages since we sealed these doors, you are the first who came seeking connection rather than conquest." Kira stood very still and tried to find her voice and finally managed to speak. "Who are you? What is this place? Who built it?" The figure of light moved closer and its features became clearer, showing a face that was kind and sad and very, very old. "I am the Keeper," it said. "I was created to watch over this sanctuary and to wait for one who was worthy to receive what we left behind. And I have been waiting for 3,200,000 years." "The Orvith," Kira whispered, remembering what her professor friend had told her. "You were created by the Orvith." "Yes," the Keeper said. "My creators knew their end was coming. They knew their star would die, and their world would burn, and their civilization would vanish from the universe. And they could not stop it, but they could leave something behind." The Keeper gestured and the walls of the chamber came alive with images, showing a beautiful world orbiting a blue star, showing cities of glass and light, showing beings that were tall and graceful with silver skin and dark eyes full of wisdom. They built this fortress to hold everything they were. The Keeper continued. All their knowledge and all their art and all their history and all the technology they created across 1,000,000 years of civilization. It is all here preserved and waiting. Kira felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched the images of a civilization, living and growing and creating beautiful things. And then she watched as their sun began to change and swell, and they realized they had only a few centuries left. "Why did you seal the doors?" she asked. "Why not let someone find this place and share what you left behind?" The Keeper was silent for a moment, and the images on the walls faded to darkness, because we knew what the galaxy would become. It said finally, "We watched the younger species rise, and we saw how they treated each other and how they treated the universe. And we knew that if we simply left our sanctuary open, it would be raided and fought over and used to build weapons and make war." The Keeper moved closer to Kira and looked at her with eyes made of light. "So we created a test," it said. "The doors would only open for a visitor who came not with weapons or scanners or plans for exploitation, but with simple honest curiosity and a desire to connect. Every species that found this place came looking for resources or power or advantage," the Keeper said. "They scanned the doors and tried to force them open, and when they failed, they left without ever understanding why. Because they never thought to simply introduce themselves and ask." Kira understood now why she had succeeded where entire civilizations had failed. Not because she was smarter or stronger, but because she was human and humans had not yet learned to stop wondering, "What will your kind do with what we left behind?" The Keeper asked, and his voice was gentle but serious. "This is the question I must ask before I can share our gifts with you." Kira thought about her species and all their flaws and all their mistakes and all the terrible things they had done to each other throughout their history. And she also thought about their kindness and their creativity and their stubborn refusal to give up hope even in the darkest times. "We will probably make mistakes," she said honestly. "Humans are not perfect, and we have done many foolish and harmful things. But we also keep trying to be better. We keep reaching out to understand things we do not understand. We keep hoping that tomorrow will be kinder than today." The Keeper smiled, and it was the saddest and most beautiful smile Kira had ever seen. "That is exactly what we hope to hear," it said. "Not a promise of perfection, but a commitment to keep trying. That is all we ever wanted from whoever found our doors." The walls of the chamber lit up again with symbols and images and data streams beyond counting. The entire legacy of a civilization that had chosen to trust the future with everything they had. "Welcome to the sanctuary of the Orvith," the Keeper said. "Welcome, Kira Vasquez of Earth, first inheritor of our gift, and Kira stood in the heart of the ancient fortress and wept for the people who had built it, and rejoiced for what they had chosen to leave behind. The news spread faster than Kira had expected, racing across the communication networks of the galaxy like fire through dry grass. And within 2 weeks, the sky above Vara 7 was filled with ships. The Thyran hegemony arrived first with 3 massive warships bristling with weapons, their hulls painted in the dark red colors of their military caste. And they demanded immediate access to what they called a strategic asset of galactic importance. The merchant syndicates came next with sleek corporate vessels full of lawyers and negotiators and experts in acquisition, already calculating the value of Orvith technology in credits and market share of the Valesi elders, sent a delegation of their most ancient and powerful psionics, beings who had lived for thousands of years and who believed their wisdom gave them the right to control anything they considered too dangerous for a lesser species, and there were others too. Representatives from a dozen civilizations who had heard about the impossible discovery and wanted their share of whatever treasures lay inside the black doors. Kira stood at the entrance to the sanctuary and watched them all arrive and felt very small and very alone. A single human facing the combined might and ambition of galactic powers that had been traveling between stars since before her species had invented the wheel. The Thyran commander was the first to approach her, a massive being covered in armored scales, with 4 arms and eyes that burned with barely contained aggression. "You will step aside and allow us to secure this installation," he said in a voice that was used to being obeyed. "This technology is too important to be left in the hands of one individual, especially a human." Kira did not step aside. "The doors will not open for you," she said calmly. "They were built to recognize intention, and your intention is conquest." The commander laughed, a harsh sound like metal scraping against stone, and he ordered his soldiers to advance on the doors with cutting tools and explosives and every weapon they had brought. They tried for 3 days, and they failed completely, just as everyone else had failed before them. And the doors remained sealed and silent and utterly indifferent to their efforts. Merchant syndicates tried next with a different approach, offering Kira wealth beyond imagination if she would simply open the doors and allow them to catalog the contents and establish exclusive trading rights. "You could be the richest human who ever lived," their chief negotiator said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Think of what you could do with that kind of money. Think of how you could help your people. All we ask is a small partnership." Kira refused, and the negotiator's smile disappeared, and his voice became cold as he reminded her that the syndicates had ways of dealing with people who refused reasonable offers. The Valesi elders were the most dangerous because they did not threaten or bribe. They simply tried to reach into Kira's mind and take what they wanted. She felt them pushing against her thoughts like cold fingers trying to find a way in ancient minds that had bent the wills of thousands before her. And she felt herself starting to slip and lose control. But then something happened that the Valesi did not expect. The Keeper intervened, reaching out from the sanctuary with power that made the Valesi psionics look like children playing with toys. And it pushed them back so hard that 3 of them collapsed, unconscious, and had to be carried back to their ship. "This sanctuary has chosen its inheritor." The Keeper's voice rang out across the valley where all the gathered ships could hear. "It will not respond to force or wealth or manipulation. It will only respond to her." The factions argued among themselves and threatened each other, and formed temporary alliances that fell apart within hours. And through it all, Kira stood her ground and refused to be moved on the 10th day of the standoff. The Thyran commander lost his patience and aimed his ship's main weapons at the entrance to the sanctuary, threatening to destroy everything if he could not have it. Kira walked out into the open and stood directly in the line of fire. One small human between an ancient miracle and the forces that wanted to claim it. "You can kill me," she said, broadcasting on all channels so that every ship in orbit could hear. "But you cannot have what is inside. The doors will seal forever if you destroy me. The Keeper has made this very clear. And you will have nothing but ashes and regret." The Thyran commander hesitated with his finger on the firing control. And Kira continued speaking. "This is not a weapon," she said. "This is not a resource to be mined or a prize to be won. This is a gift from a people who died 3 million years ago. A gift they wanted to give freely to whoever was worthy of receiving it." She looked up at the ships filling the sky, at all the power and ambition and fear gathered above this forgotten world. "You have all forgotten what it means to receive a gift," she said. "You see everything as something to be taken and controlled and used for advantage. And that is exactly why the doors open for me and not for any of you. I am not going to let you turn this miracle into another excuse for war and greed," she said. "I am going to stand here for as long as it takes. And you are going to have to decide whether you are willing to destroy the greatest discovery in galactic history just because you cannot control it." The silence stretched across the valley and up into the sky where the warships waited, and one by one, the weapons lowered, not because the factions had given up their ambitions, but because they knew she was right. Because they knew that destroying the sanctuary would gain them nothing and lose them everything. Kira stood alone in front of the ancient doors and did not move. And for the first time in a very long time, the great powers of the galaxy found themselves facing something they could not take by force, a single stubborn human who refused to let them have what they wanted, and they had no idea what to do about her. The negotiations lasted for months, with representatives from every major faction arguing and demanding and threatening in turn. But Kira held firm to the same simple principle throughout all of it. The Orvith had left their legacy as a gift, and gifts are not taken. They are earned. She proposed something that most of the galaxy thought was impossible. The sanctuary would be open to anyone who agreed to approach it peacefully, without weapons, without soldiers, without plans for exploitation or profit. Any being from any species could come to learn from the Orvith archives. But they had to come with empty hands and open minds, seeking knowledge for its own sake rather than advantage over others. The Thyran hegemony refused immediately, calling the proposal naive and dangerous and unacceptable to any serious power. And their ships departed Vera 7 with promises that this was not over. The merchant syndicates calculated the potential profits from unrestricted knowledge sharing and concluded that it was economically unviable. So they left as well, with their lawyers already drafting complaints to file with various galactic courts. The Valesi elders debated among themselves for weeks before finally deciding that knowledge which could not be controlled was too risky to engage with. And they withdrew with quiet dignity and barely hidden resentment. Most of the great powers left, and Kira watched their ships disappear into the sky and felt a moment of doubt, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But then other ships began to arrive. Smaller ships carrying different kinds of visitors. A young Thyran scientist who had left her people rather than give up her research came to study the Orvith understanding of stellar physics, fascinated by how they had predicted the death of their own son. A group of Valesi students who had been expelled from their academies for questioning the old ways came to explore the Orvith philosophy of mind and consciousness. Independent researchers from a dozen species arrived with nothing but curiosity and questions. Scholars and dreamers who had been told their whole lives that knowledge was power and had never quite believed it. They came in ones and twos and small groups. Beings who did not fit into the rigid structures of their home civilizations. Beings who still remembered how to wonder. The Keeper welcomed them all and opened the archives to anyone who passed through the doors with genuine desire to learn. And slowly the sanctuary began to fill with life again after 3 million years of silence. Kira worked with the Keeper to establish rules for the new community. Simple guidelines based on respect and cooperation and the free sharing of discoveries. She called it the Orvith Institute, a name that honored the people who had built the sanctuary and the values they had hoped to pass on to future generations. The great powers of the galaxy watched from a distance with suspicion and resentment, waiting for the experiment to fail, waiting for the humans and their allies to prove that they were different from everyone else. But the Institute did not fail the researchers who gathered there made discoveries that changed entire fields of science, unlocking secrets that the Orvith had preserved across millions of years. And they shared those discoveries freely with anyone who wanted to learn. Medical breakthroughs that could cure diseases which had killed billions. Engineering techniques that could build ships faster and safer and more efficient than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Artistic traditions that opened new ways of seeing and creating beauty. All of it flowed out from the sanctuary on Vareth 7, offered to the galaxy without price or condition. And slowly the universe began to change. Some civilizations rejected the gifts, too proud or too paranoid to accept knowledge they had not earned through their own efforts. But others embraced what the Institute offered. And those civilizations grew stronger and healthier and more creative. And they began to look at humans differently than they had before. The species that everyone had dismissed as reckless newcomers. The beings who had only been traveling between stars for 2 centuries had done something that none of the ancient powers had been able to do. They had opened the doors that would not open. They had earned the trust of the oldest gift in the galaxy. They had remembered how to hope. The Keeper came to Kira on the evening of the Institute's first anniversary, appearing beside her as she stood at the entrance to the sanctuary, watching ships arrive from across the stars. "You have done what we hoped someone would do," the Keeper said, and its voice was full of a peace that had not been there before. "You have made our death mean something." Kira shook her head and smiled. "I did not do anything special. I just knocked on the door and said, 'Hello.'" "Yes," the Keeper said. And that was exactly what the galaxy had forgotten how to do. The Keeper began to fade, its light growing dimmer as it prepared to enter its final rest after 3 million years of waiting. "Our watch is over," it said. "The sanctuary belongs to you now, to all of you. Take care of what we left behind and remember us sometimes when you look at the stars." "We will," Kira promised. And the Keeper smiled one last time and was gone. Kira stood alone at the entrance to the sanctuary. But she was not really alone anymore, because behind her, the halls were filled with beings from across the galaxy, learning and creating and sharing. And above her, the sky was filled with ships bringing more seekers every day. She thought about the Orvith and how they had faced their extinction with grace and generosity, choosing to leave a gift for the future instead of raging against the darkness. She thought about humanity and how her people had stumbled into the stars with no idea what they were doing, making mistakes and learning from them and never giving up. She thought about the galaxy and how it was old and tired and had forgotten so many things, and how maybe it just needed someone to remind it that wonder was still possible. A young being from a species she did not recognize approached her nervously and asked if it was true that anyone could enter the sanctuary and learn. Kira smiled and gestured toward the open doors where blue light spilled out into the fading evening. "The doors are open," she said. "They have been waiting for you." The young being walked forward into the light, one more seeker joining the thousands who had come before. And Kira watched them go with a heart full of something she had not felt in a very long time: pride, not just in herself but in all of them, in everyone who had chosen to reach out and connect rather than conquer. The galaxy had forgotten how to knock, but humans had remembered, and now the doors would never close again.